Hello, welcome back to Bonaventure Time. I know it's been a while since I have released a video. I've been working on a couple projects that just have taken quite a bit of my attention, but I am here to record some more videos, and I wanted to talk today about something that people have brought up and wanted me to discuss on, at least in a philosophical manner, and that is the idea of evolution. Um, so before I dive into this topic, I just want to bring a couple clarifications, just reminding that this, again, a video like this and all my other videos are not meant to pursue the depths of scholarly work on this idea, but mainly to just introduce a broad philosophical framework. So if these aren't particular enough, I apologize, but it's not meant to be super deep and super overly scholarly, I guess is my point. They're not lectures. They're simply introduction videos that I've made for my friends who wanted to know more about philosophy, and people have happened to like them enough to where I make more videos. So just that in mind, this is not going to be like a lecture of any sorts. It's just a broad introduction into the topic of evolution from a philosophical method. That also being said, it'll also be from a Catholic perspective, because I myself am a Catholic and I follow St. Bonaventure in believing that holiness and grace are integral to the roles of philosophy, especially Christian philosophy, and in particular theology as well. So just that kind of reminder. So if that's not something that would appeal to you, this wouldn't be the video for you. But hopefully that does appeal to you, and this can be fruitful. That being said, I'm going to dive into this topic of evolution from a philosophical manner. Now, evolution, as it's broadly known, is usually taken in the Darwinian sense. And so perhaps there might be the question, why am I talking about it if it's a biological concept? I think I have a couple reasons. One, I think there are philosophical implications always behind every science. And two, I think there's a philosophical significance to Darwin's theory, particularly just in the context of when Darwin came up with this theory. Now, recall, Darwin's coming in the time of around the time of Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Kierkegaard. I could keep going, right? But these prominent figures in modern philosophy, we have existentialism, we have idealism, right? Transcendental idealism. What's my point in bringing this up? Marxism as well. Well, in this particular history of philosophy, we're seeing, and this predominantly takes shape in Hegel, this change from this continuity to this idea of the master-slave dialect, which Hegel himself writes about and following philosophers adopt. And really what this is like a conflict theory. For Hegel, we battle to the death, really, naturally. That is our primitive sort of instinct to battle to the death. Talks about this in Phenomenology of Spirit. And it's only until we come to view each other in the Kantian principle, that is as ends and not as mere means, that we move past this dialect and move on to the idea of community and the I-thou structure, so to speak. But the point is, Hegel started this shift that Marx adopts, that Nietzsche adopts, right? That all these philosophies are adopting, and that is we are in our natural primitive state, in conflict. So they're conflict theorists, right? And why I think this is important is because I think Marx and Hegel have great influence on Darwin, or at least why Darwin's theory is so appealing to people, even today and certainly at the time, because if conflict's written into our human nature and it's just natural, so to speak, then conflict becomes a way of making progress, right? Hegel, we progress through the conflict to a becoming. For Marx, right, it takes on an even more radical form, because for Hegel, it's this integration between dialects. For Marx, though, it's destruction, right? You have this dialect and you destroy it and you have a revolution, right, to bring about a new change. So for him, destruction and conflict, in a more radical sense, is progress for Marx. And why I think that's significant historically speaking is because for Darwin then to say that survival of the fittest, conflict, right? I think this is appealing because people are appealing to these philosophers around his time. That this idea then that conflict and destruction and this natural tending against community really uh, is favored because of these philosophers, and Darwin's favored, or Darwin might even have been influenced to make this idea that this is a way to kind of redeem suffering, so to speak, which Nietzsche critiques many people for trying to do. But in many ways, I think Nietzsche himself is kind of guilty of that in some aspect. I think everyone, according to Nietzsche's rule, would be, because that right, we constantly are trying to redeem suffering. So I think that there's a historical significance to when Darwin's theory came out, because of this conflict theory between Marx and Hegel, that they really, others used it certainly, but they really expanded upon it the most. And Marx certainly was, it makes sense because Marx, co-founder of Marxism and kind of one of his teachers was Feuerbach. Feuerbach was Hegel's student, so there's the connection there if you wanted to know that. So that's one philosophical importance here that I think we can look at the idea of evolution and why Darwin's theory is appealing. But now to the idea of evolution in general, the idea of survival of the fittest. What is our philosophical implications of this? Well, I think I think there's problems with it, because if everything's survival of the fittest, and things, for as Darwin notes, things are just passed on through the genes, such as like a fish swims faster than another fish, and these genes get passed on, so that it just is, again, that survival. These faster fish outlast the other slower fish, and they just keep breeding to continue that line through conflict, through competition. But something that does, right, is it not only does it eliminate community, but it's kind of eliminating a genera, a class of the fish, really, because they're fighting against one another. So we have here like an individualism, where every fish is in contrast with another fish. There's no real genera, or at least there's in some way a destruction of the genera in a formal concept. Obviously, scientists can classify them under a genus and a species, but in a formal concept, right, a logical concept, we're seeing that be destroyed because they're being pinned against one another. There's no metaphysical community between these fishes. So I think Darwin's theory kind of runs into problems in that aspect, and that there's no coming together for greater good, especially when you put that in the context of humans. Right, I think that is a reductionism, which makes sense, because Darwin, again, is around the time of material reductionists, Marx, Rousseau, Hegel. So that's not a shock to me that Darwin's theory seems materially reductionistic. And if you put that, what I was just saying, though, into humans, right, there's no real coming together in community, but again, in our primitive states, we are set against one another, and we are not in that I-thou structure. We are simply in conflict, striving to be the best versions of ourselves, striving to, right, it really in Nietzsche's will to power, willing to be these Übermensch, right, these superior beings, right? So I think in that, though, you're destroying community and destroying genera, and in many ways the species, really, because you're not really having a universal concept for them to hold under. And then you're destroying, really, the unique individual. By trying to make them individuals, you're actually damaging them as individuals, because individuals only shine as true individuals in light of community, which sounds contradictory, but if you think about it, right, if there's something that makes you unique, how do you know that you're unique if you're outside of community or outside someone to know that uniqueness, the unrepeatability? So that's something I've talked about in another video, that I do believe in individual essences. Essence is kind of a word that I don't really like to use when I say that, but attached to a common essence. I talked about this in my Stein video on plants, humans, and animals. But that being said, there's no point to being that uniqueness if it's not known by someone, it's not affirmed by someone, right? So you need the community to affirm the individual. And I think Darwin's evolutionary theory kind of overlooks that, and especially around the philosophies that he's around as well in his time. So I think there is problems with the survival of the fittest. But then, what is evolution then? Well, I don't think it's just Darwin's theory. There is certainly a continuity and a development of sort to creation, to creatures. But I want to suggest that this development and this evolutionary change within creation is actually due to really act and potency. This is something Stein talks about in her work Potency and Act. Her godmother, Hedwig Conrad Martius, talks about this as well in her metaphysical conversations. And that is, right, we have this sort of birth from below, as Conrad Martius calls it, where we're born out of earth. But there's also this born from above, this idea of God infusing the soul. And only then, right, if the soul animates life, as Aristotle talks about, in De Anima, right, well before his time, and people really affirming that scientifically and metaphysically. If that's the case, then where does evolution can't, under a Darwinian concept, can't account for life and the phenomena of from non-being to being, right? You can go through Aquinas' argument for motion or Bonaventure's teleological argument, right? But eventually you run into the problem of being to, non-being to being, non-life to life, right? So you have to go into this. But what I want to suggest is, along with Stein and a little bit of Bonaventure, right, is we have this idea of what Bonaventure calls, right, this pre-form within creation, right? God establishes creation to dwell and to live amongst itself, right, sustaining it. But it acts on its own, right? A human person acts on its own, but is sustained in his being through God, right? Because he's the creator, if you're following me in this. But in the same sense, God gives certain capacities to the human person, right? And these are capacities of which we could actualize or not. Do I realize my ability to become a musician or not, right? There's this, what Bonaventure calls like a pre-form. And it's these pre-forms hidden within matter, right, that act, that theory of act and potency, that these actualizations start to bring about changes, right? So if Stein talks about this, right, in Potency and Act, that if we're changing, it's because new realizations are being realized through the act, through actualization, because of certain potencies that certain species and genera have. So when we look at the class of fish that's getting faster, they're really actualizing certain potencies that they had. It's not this idea of survival of the fittest and I'm set against everyone and then I pass these genes on. No, it's simply an actualization of a potency that they have according to their genera and their species. So really what we see with this theory of act and potency is actually a preservation of genera, a preservation of species, an affirming of individuals, an affirming of community, and an account for change within a substance that endures that change. So I change according, right? I take on a change insofar as I actualize a potency, say the potency to philosophize, but my being doesn't change because that change takes place within a substance, right? This is what Aristotle talks about, accidental change and substantial change. It's his way of accounting for Pythagoras' idea that from nothing comes nothing, right? So you can't move from non-being to being, but you can move in a change according to a substance with certain potencies and acts, right? So I think this theory of potency and act is a better way to look at evolution, a better way to look at change. And if you want, you could take, as I do, the St. Bonaventure approach, where God, the creator, gives a certain potencies within the person or within the creature, and of which he can actualize, right, and fully realize, and thereby you account for certain changes that happen over time while still maintaining and preserving community, and that we're naturally tended towards community. Because at the heart of it, I don't have problems with Darwin's theory because of the idea that it talks about change that happens throughout history. No, that's pretty evident that there's changes throughout history. I have problems with Darwin's theory because of the promotion of conflict theory that I think is hidden underneath that. I don't think people realize that it is an influence of its time. It's a product of modern thought, of Marxism, of Hegelianism, of material reductionism. So I have problems for that reason, and for that reason I would hold a more metaphysically grounded account for evolution, and that's in the theory of Act and Potency, the Rationes Seminalis for Bonaventure, those preforms, or, right, again, just Thomas Aquinas and Edith Stein on substance, accidents, form, matter, potency, and act. All of that, which Martius alludes to in some ways. So that's I'm not going to give an account for evolution in more detail than this. I just simply wanted to talk briefly on what I think are problems within Darwin's theory and just offer that perspective of potency and act, and that refining these terms that have been rejected in modern philosophy but are finding a resurface in postmodern philosophy, people, as that's a term people like to use, or contemporary thought. I think refining the theory of potency and act and understanding its significance in relation to evolution it bears much greater weight than Darwin's survival of the fittest. So before I end this, I'll just give some recommendations. If you want to look more into this, I think Father Norris Clark's One in the Many. There's a great chapter on this, on evolution, that he does according to the theory of act and potency. Hedvig Conrad Martius, The Metaphysical Conversations, short book, she deals with this. I would read that alongside Edith Stein's Potency and Act, particularly chapter 5. You're going to get a really rich account in chapter 6. And then if you want to get into St. Bonaventure's, the corpus of his ideas, according to creation, I would read his Collations and Hexameron. So those are some reference books if you want to dive deeper into this idea of evolution and creation, the changes that happen over the history of time, the philosophy of history, so to speak. And I think that those give a better account than survival of the fittest. So hopefully this video just introduces you to these topics, the philosophical significance of evolution, and at least gives you an idea of how to philosophize about evolution and how to go about it, and at least equips you with the idea of where to go to learn more about this, especially for Catholics, to who to go to if you want to engage in this topic and go further into it. So I hope this video was helpful. Please let me know, and please let me know if there's any other philosophers you want to know about. Thank you, and God bless.